Scrapwood challenge, Scrapwood challenge. It's crap, it's firewood, but some of the wood is good.
Around a year ago, I saw this chair on Marketplace and I thought it'd be a fun project to try and make out of wood, so that's what I'll be doing in this video. I made a 3D model to work from, and then from there I chopped it up into layers and then into pieces, and I'll try and replicate those with wood. I used the model to make drawings and then into templates. I've got them printed out, so let's get some wood and get into it. They're mainly small parts, so I can use up some of the smaller pieces of scrap camphor laurel. I'm not sure there's enough, but it'll get me started. As I said, most of the pieces are small, but I do need a couple of bigger pieces for the seat, so I'll quickly prepare those. I'm just putting them straight through the thicknesser as they're too wide to put through my jointer and joint one face first. As long as they're fairly flat, they'll be fine, and I'm flipping them over between each pass to try and even out the two faces. That's not too bad at all, so next I'll joint them, ready to glue them together. By planing them at the same time, it doesn't matter if the joints are perfectly perpendicular to the face. Even if they were way off on an angle, they'll still fit together perfectly. I left it for a while and went for lunch, so next I'll join together the templates and cut out the seat shape. The easiest way to make templates that are bigger than the paper is to use Matthias Wandel's big print program. Unfortunately, it doesn't work on a Mac though, so I just overlay the diagonal grid manually in my vector software. I'm cutting close to the line, which I'll do on all of the pieces, and I won't spend the time sanding them back, but I do need to get them pretty good because when I come to carve the seat, the edge will be a guide. That's the seat blank ready. I will be adding a piece of plywood later on to stabilise it, but now I'll start cutting the side pieces. There's quite a few of them. I'll start with the first layer, and I'm doing that because they're the widest and I can pick out the most suitable pieces. I'm just using a regular glue stick as it's easy to remove the template and the glue afterwards. As I thought would be the case, I don't have enough wood prepared. I still have these to go, so I'll quickly prep some more. It's not easy figuring out how much will be needed at the start of a project like this, but now I'm getting closer, I can work out what I need to finish. That's all of the templates on, so next I'll cut them out. There's quite a few to cut, but it didn't take too long and I quite enjoyed it. I love using this bandsaw. I built it nearly 10 years ago and it's still going strong. I need to keep track of the part, so I'm transferring the part numbers onto the back and then I can remove the templates. I wet them a couple of times with a damp rag and the paper just about fell off. Just as I got to the last couple of templates, I realised that I've missed a step. Before removing the templates, I meant to sand the ends because they're joints, so I could get a good fit between them. But now I can't do that, so I'll just clean them up and just do it by eye. And I think it'll be perfectly fine, but it was still a bit of a stupid mistake. I'll just clean them up a bit by removing any furry bits, and I'll also scrape off any last bits of glue. I've sorted all of the pieces into layers, and here's the first layer, but before I start gluing that on, I'll add that piece of plywood that I mentioned earlier to the underside of the seat. I'm marking it out as I'm going to remove the material to make a recess for the plywood to sit into. I think this should work well and prevent any movement of the seat, which I think could have possibly affected the rest of the layers. A forcing a bit is the best and fastest way to remove the waste, and then I can use a router to finish it. While the glue's setting on that, I'll prepare the joints on the first layer ready to glue in place. I'm taking very little off as I don't have the template to work to. I don't want to change them too much, and I did bandsaw them pretty close to the line. The layer is symmetrical, so with some sanding and checking, I made sure that both sides were the same. I'm positioning the layer by checking the overhang on either side, making sure that the front edges are flush with the seat edge and the middle joint is centered. I'll add some marks and then I'll use those to line things up while I'm gluing them down. I'm using Type Bond 3, which takes a bit longer to go off, but I'm using it because it's very good at filling voids, so if the joints aren't super tight, they should still fill with glue. With segmented pieces, the strength is in the staggered layers rather than the joints, so it should be plenty strong enough. While that's setting, I'll sand the next couple of layers to get them ready. I'm not leaving the clamps on for too long, about 30 to 40 minutes, which I reckon's long enough. The next few layers are just one piece either side, which will create an opening at the back. I thought about gluing a couple of layers at a time, but I reckon it could get difficult keeping things aligned, so I reckon it's safer to be patient and keep going one at a time. I've glued another one on off camera and I'm leaving it about 30 minutes in between, and I've still got one more single one to go before putting a full layer around. I was finding it difficult to clamp just on these little edges here, so I'm clamping directly from the underneath with a block of wood going across. But to stop these wings from spreading out, I've put a clamp across there, and that's doing the trick. I started the project with a bit of a plan, but I hadn't worked out all of the details of how to do every step. This is one of them, and I've just decided to glue up the next full layer first, then glue it in place when the glue has dried. It would have been difficult to do in position with no support underneath at the back. I think this layer shows why I was worried about the wood movement in the seat. That's before I added the plywood. It's a pretty wide area which could have moved several millimeters, and I think that would have put pressure on the top layers. On this next layer, I'm sanding each joint to fit so it sits nicely on top of the previous layer. I'm marking the corner of the joint that I need to put slightly more pressure on to tighten up the fit. I carried on gluing the rest of the layers off camera, and I still have got one more layer to go, but I've decided that I think it's tall enough as it is, so I'm not going to bother using those. I'm going to leave it as it is. I'm going to take the clamps off and start carving. And to shape it, I'll use an angle grinder fitted with a power carving disc. I could have cut the blocks bigger and had plenty of material to play with, but the reason I cut close to the template lines on the bandsaw was now I can use the joints between the layers as guides. I just need to remove the corners, and when I hit the glue line, I'll be just about there. I was going to do this outside, but the weather is super hot in our Queensland summer, so I'll stay in the aircon and deal with the mess afterwards. Having the layers as guides is working really well, and this is going much faster than I thought it would. I've got the outside to a point I'm happy with using the carving disc. There's a few waves in it, so next I'll use an aggressive 40 grit disc on the orbital sander. I could only find these ones at the local hardware store. The whole pattern is wrong, but there's already sawdust everywhere anyway. The 40 grit disc ripped through it, and I reckon I could have even skipped the power carving completely. It would have taken much longer, but it would do it, and definitely an option. Anyway, it's looking good, so on to the inside. It's a bit trickier sanding the inside curve of the backrest, but even though the orbital sander isn't exactly designed for this and more for flat surfaces, it still worked well enough. This next bit could be a bit more challenging. I'll take it slowly and see how it goes. It's working well, and even though I usually like to leave a guide on an angle grinder, it has to come off for this task. It keeps catching the side and getting in the way. The radius is too tight for the orbital sander, so I'll sand this one by hand. I'm using 40 grit though, so it shouldn't be too difficult to refine the shape. There's still more carving to go, but that's the end of this day. My respirator is amazing while working in this kind of dust. It has 100% positive pressure, which means I'm breathing in zero dust. When I finish though, there's still plenty of dust on my clothes, which I can still breathe in. So I try and get most of that off with the blower. Anyway, it's the next morning, so let's finish the carving. It's looking great. I'm very happy with it so far. So next I'll finish the radius on the underside. I'm feeling for high spots that are very obvious to the touch of my hand. It really is amazing what your touch can tell you. That feels good with no obvious bumps, so I'll move on to refining the edge, which is the last part of the carving. I almost cut this corner off with the jigsaw, but it took no time at all to carve it away. It's making more dust, but there's already plenty of that anyway. For the edge on the opening, I just freehanded a fair curve using the corners of the box at the two ends. I've not used these die grinder carving bits before, but it works great. I also got hold of this carbide file that I thought looked interesting, so I'll try that out with refining the ends of the opening. I really like the file, and that's the carving done, so next I'll sand it. You may be able to see that a few of the joints are slightly open, but I'll deal with those in a moment. It's starting to come together, but I need to do something with the edges, and I'm not quite sure what I want, but I'll try rounding them over and see how that looks. Before I do that though, I'll deal with those open joints. There were only a few of them, but that worked very well. I'll start with the chamfer on the edges, which I can keep consistent by eye, and then round that over with sandpaper. It's okay, but it looks a bit like the edge of a regular board. I reckon taking off a bit more on the inside edge will give it a bit more style. I'm not just sanding the edge smooth here, I'm final shaping it by taking out any humps and bumps. Camphor laurel looks amazing because it has lots of different grain and colours running through it, but when it's used in segmented pieces I think it looks a bit jarring, so I reckon stain will even it out, plus I really wanted something darker anyway. To get a more even stain, I'll apply sanding sealer first. This will fill all the pores in the end grain, which tends to get very dark with the stain and can look a bit blotchy. The curved pieces have face grain in the middle, but the ends near the joints are getting closer to end grain, definitely more open, so this should help keep the stain more consistent. This is the worst part of using sanding sealer for stain. It all needs removing back to bare wood, and it isn't much fun either as it clogs up the sandpaper. After sanding it off, I applied a second coat and I did the whole thing again. This may seem like a crazy task, but the sealer does remain in the pores, stopping the stain from soaking into them. It's a lot of work, but it does leave a super smooth finish. After applying the stain as evenly as I can, I'll leave it for a few minutes and then with the dry rag remove any excess. It's looking more like I imagined it would, so next I'll coat it with oil-based varnish. Over the next few days, I put a couple of coats on, then sanded it smooth to finish it with a couple of coats of spray. And even though I'm using a spray can, it's the same product as the first brush coats. I'm super happy with it. I will put one more coat on and I'm going to finish the video here. In my next video, I'll finish the chair. There's still the pedestal to make, a swivel mechanism and the seat pads. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching and I'll see you on the next one.